Is this you? Hey everyone, we're Flour Power. Welcome to our video about the functional properties of different types of flour. Me and my colleagues at Flour Power understand that flour is a puzzling ingredient. It's all white, it's all powdery, and there's so many types of it at the supermarket aisle. Challenge is applying the right type of flour in the right type of situation and understanding why some substitutions are possible while others are not. Our goal is to help you, the chef at home, understand the power that flour alone has on the way that a food product turns out. In this video, we'll explore the chemistry behind wheat flour in bread, almond flour in macarons, rice flour in gluten-free muffins, and tapioca flour in boba pearls for bubble tea. Because the most commonly known and used flour is wheat flour, all-purpose flour, we're going to be comparing each dish prepared with an alternative flour, so almond flour, rice flour, and tapioca flour, to a dish prepared with all-purpose flour of the same ingredients. Everything else is the same except for a one-to-one substitution of the flour. This will give us the chance to compare the dishes head-to-head in a taste test to see whether all-purpose flour really is all-purpose. We will begin by giving wheat flour a fair chance and trying it out in a recipe for yeast-leavened bread. We're going to compare the wheat flour head-to-head with rice flour in this case with a one-to-one substitution in the recipe. Okay, that's enough from me. Let's cut to our frustrated chef and see how she's doing making bread with wheat flour and rice flour.
As Raquel mentioned, we are making bread using both all-purpose flour and rice flour to compare the results. As Thaisa makes the bread, let me explain what's happening. The yeast begins feeding on the sugars in the flour and releases carbon dioxide that makes the bread rise. There are a lot of different types of flour used in bread, but the most common used in raised bread is wheat flour. This is because wheat flour contains two proteins, glutenin and gliadin, which forms gluten with water. As you knead the dough, the gluten becomes stretchier, which will then fill with thousands of gas bubbles to cause the dough to rise. Starch is also an important player in the bread-making process. When starch granules are attacked by enzymes present in flour, they release the sugars that yeast needs to make carbon dioxide. Wheat flour is 70% starch. The picture on the left is the wheat flour dough, and as you can see, there's a lot more bubbles trapped in the network compared to the rice flour on the right. An important step in the bread making process is kneading the dough. The matrix of proteins in the dough mentioned before is formed by kneading it. The dough must be kneaded to create the fully formed elastic gluten network. If the dough is not, the matrix will not be elastic and will not be able to trap the produced CO2. Because the rice dough does not have the proteins present to produce a gluten network, the dough does not need to be kneaded. The dough is mixed again before putting it in the pan for baking. A cornstarch and water glaze was created and used for both of the doughs. We will bake the bread in a steamy, humid environment to aid in the baking process. Wow, look how pretty they are. As you can see, the one that had the wheat flour on the left is much higher than the rice flour on the right. Again, this is because the wheat flour was able to trap all that gas in the network while the rice flour was not able to. The rice flour is crunchy on the top and the bottom, but the inside is very dense and doughy. And as you can see in the slice, there's a lot more gas pockets in the wheat flour.
So here we have bread made with all-purpose flour, and then here we have bread made with rice flour. All the proportions were maintained the same. We just substituted the flours one for one.
Okay, so this one obviously rose a lot more, and there's a lot larger bubbles. You can kind of see like the air pockets are a lot larger on this one. This one obviously didn't rise very much, and you can kind of see on the top it's a little like cracked looking from where the air bubbles like formed, but then they kind of escaped because the like flour couldn't hold the air in. And you kind of can tell it's like this one's much harder and a little more condensed and like a much solid dough versus this one's like, seems a lot more springy and has like, you can see on the side there's a lot of air bubbles throughout it.
So I'll cut a piece right here.
Thank you.
Yes, you're
Okay, so looking inside, you can obviously tell this one's a lot more solid. It's like very dense. This one has a lot of air. It's very light, and like it's pretty soft. Versus this one's like pretty hard and like tight, and seems like pretty solid dough in there. They don't really smell any different. Yeah, it doesn't smell about the same. This one seems like a normal bread that has a soft inside versus like a hard crust. Whereas this one just kind of seems the same throughout. Really good bread. The crust is really good. This one, it did at the bottom kind of form more of a crust, I guess from the pan. And it's very kind of spongy almost. It's like very solid. And it's really hard to chew. It tastes a lot saltier in it as well, a little bit oilier because I think it's really condensed, so it's like the flavors are a lot stronger. Whereas this one seems like very well proportioned bread, like a light saltiness to the other flour. So I like the normal flour one much better.
Here are the ingredients that we need to make macarons. To begin, we separate the egg yolks and the egg whites from each other. We only want the egg whites because those are the only parts that are involved in the creation of the meringue. Meringues are a type of foam that are also a colloidal dispersion. By adding shear by whipping, the proteins in the egg white denature from their original structure and surround the air molecules that are being incorporated, which are aided by hydrophobic interactions. The addition of sugar helps to hold the structure of the foam, and it is also believed that the sugar helps the proteins gather on the surface of the air molecules and stabilizes them. In a separate bowl, we sift the almond flour together with the powdered sugar to ensure that no clumps are left. Then we gently fold the flour into the meringue to mix and minimize the rupturing of air bubbles. We mix until everything is evenly incorporated, then we transfer the mixture over to piping bags. And then this process is repeated for the wheat flour that we'll be comparing this almond flour recipe to. Now we pipe them onto a baking sheet, making sure they are far enough apart from each other so that they don't stick together in the oven. These might be a little too close. Yep, yeah, get rid of that. Thank you, chef. Now we start over with the parchment paper, making sure they're spaced evenly far apart. Then we repeat with the wheat flour. So while repeating the process with wheat flour, you can see that there's no big difference in between how the mixture of the almond flour and the wheat flour look. Into the oven they go at 300 degrees for 17 minutes. Wow, look at these coming out of the oven. The ones on the right are the ones made with wheat flour, and the ones on the left are the ones made with almond flour. As you can see already, the almond flour ones have a more circular shape and a smoother texture than the abominations on the right. Almond flour is typically used when making macarons because of its unique texture and flavor. Almonds are a nut that is neutral in flavor, and almond flour contains more lipids than the traditional wheat flour. This added fat content helps to make the macarons more moist and tender, and gives the macarons their distinct flavor and texture that we all know and love. And voila! The ones on the left with almond flour, ones on the right with wheat flour.
So today for you we have macaroons of two types. We have a wheat flour and we have an almond flour macaroon. Please start with whichever one you like best. Thank you.
Very light, very airy. I like that it has a chew. Could be a little sweeter, but I give it a A 7 out of 10. Number 1, they smell kind of weird. Not as chewy as these ones. And do not like the taste. Not that. It's sticky, it's chewy, but not the good kind. This one smells fine. 2 out of 10. So see, these ones, they're flat. Overall round shape, very nice to look at. But you have this one here, the wheat one. It's hollow on the inside. And as you can see, very ugly. No one's gonna pay money for this. I would pay maybe $5 for a pack of 4 for these. This one's fine. This one smells like mayonnaise. and I know you think I'm lying, but I promise you, it smells like mayonnaise.
There are lots of different types of rice flour, like glutinous rice flour, brown rice flour, and purple rice flour, but the most widely available is white rice flour, which we decided to test. Rice flour is a popular alternative because it is known to have good digestibility and high water and oil absorption capacity compared to other gluten-free flours. This means that it can help form gels quickly, even in low concentrations, that allows for smoother and softer textures. This is why rice flour is more commonly used in breads and cakes, rather than cookies or harder bakery items. Its oil binding capacity also helps retain richer, more roastier flavors. Since rice flour gets more hydrated than wheat flour, it makes the surfaces a bit crispier when exposed to heat. A downside, though, is that since rice protein cannot generate a viscoelastic gluten network, it won't have as many air bubbles as the wheat flour, preventing it from rising as tall as it could, and instead makes it more dense. We already saw a bit of this when we saw the shorter, chewier rice bread. But despite these differences, research suggests that there are really no significant differences in overall sensory acceptability when replacing wheat flour with rice flour. We decided to test this on chocolate chip muffins. As you can see, the rice flour batter is a bit grainy and goopy compared to the wheat flour batter. It's not as visually appealing, but this changes once it comes out of the oven. Interestingly, the color is much darker for the rice flour despite its lower protein content. It is more squished without the gluten rice. The chocolate chips in the rice were also melted when cut open, indicating that the heat was more concentrated in the shorter muffin in contrast to the taller, more spacious wheat flour.
Hi, today we have for you 2 different types of muffins, one made with all-purpose flour and one made with rice flour.
Okay. Well, so as you can see, this one's more flat. This one's more plump, and then just based on the height, you can see this one is definitely taller. It smells like richer, slightly nutty. This one doesn't smell like anything. It doesn't smell like anything. Okay. Let's cut it open. Sure. I'll just cut it open. I guess you could do a close-up later. But interesting because as you can see, the chocolate kind of melted for the rice flour one, whereas the all-purpose flour you can still kind of see like the chocolates like retained. The color, obviously this one is more like dark brownish and this one is more like cream, slightly yellow. Alright. Mmm. Mmm. It tastes very spongy. It's not that sweet, but it's a little greasy. I don't know how to explain that, but the outside is pretty crispy, but the inside is just, it's not chewy per se, but it does have a little bit of that greasy kind of texture. Tastes good. Yeah, a little smaller one. Mmm. Mmm. Much sweeter for some reason. Very fluffy. Lighter. It's also softer. But, yeah.
Which one do you like more?
I honestly like both of them, This one is crispier, and I like crispy muffins, so I like this one. But if you're looking for more like chewy, softer, more like lighter, then all-purpose. But rice flour is good.
How much would you pay for a pack of flour?
$5.
The next flour we'll explore is tapioca flour. Our chef is making boba tea pearls out of tapioca flour and all-purpose flour. Tapioca flour is a gluten-free flour, but more specifically, it's an odorless and tasteless starch extracted from the cassava root. The extraction process involves washing, pulping, and squeezing the starchy liquid out of the root. In baked goods, tapioca flour is typically paired with other gluten-free flours to achieve the desired texture of the finished product. In baked goods, it can be a good substitute for wheat flour due to its binding properties. As a starch, tapioca flour molecules will interact with the liquid in a recipe to create a gel network. This is the case with boba pearls that have a characteristic bouncy chew. Starch particles, as collections of long chains of sugar molecules, will swell and break down in the presence of hot water to form new web-like connections that will retain water. This irreversible process is called starch gelatinization, and the gel becomes firm and translucent as it cools down. The pearls made with all-purpose flour will not achieve this chewiness because the wheat flour does not have the same hydrating properties. They will remain opaque and doughy throughout the entire cooking process. When tapioca flour is used in other products like baked goods, the amount of liquid in the recipe needs to be considered to achieve a light, airy, chewy texture and to avoid gumminess. Tapioca flour is also used in cooking to thicken soups, stews, puddings, and other dishes. It is unique as a starch used in thickening because it retains its texture even after freezing and thawing. When making these boba pearls, we actually froze them for a few days before boiling and they came out perfectly. In more delicate pastries like sponge cakes, tapioca flour can be substituted for up to 50% of the wheat flour and lead to lower batter viscosity and density, higher volume, and lower hardness. After the chef finishes boiling, draining, and placing the pearls in a brown sugar syrup, you'll be able to see the initial difference in texture between the tapioca pearls and the wheat flour pearls. Coming up next, the chef will present the two types of pearls to the taster and we will hear about the difference in texture in more detail. Let's finish watching the chef create these pearls and then we'll move on to the tasting.
So we have for you bubble tea made with tapioca bubbles, and here we have tapioca tea made with all-purpose flour bubbles. They were made exactly the same way. Methodology was exactly the same, and the recipes are substituted just 1-for-1 in the flour. Same amount of brown sugar, same amount of water.
Okay, want to take a look? Okay, these are the tapioca ones. They look very gelatinous on the outside, and brown in color. And then these are the all-purpose ones. They're a little bit darker. They don't look very gelatinous, but they look very similar to the tapioca ones. Okay, so I'm gonna try the tapioca. Very chewy. It's like biting into a fruit snack a little bit. It has a little bit of a give when you bite down. I'll try the all-purpose flour. This one is very interesting. It's like a dumpling when you bite down on it. It like gives away and it's very not as chewy. I would definitely choose this one, but this one is also good if you want to substitute it.
How much would you pay for a pack of 5 tapioca pearls?
A pack of 5, like 5 individual bubbles. I'd pay 50 cents for 5 bubbles. So one issue that we saw with the tapioca pearls and a little bit with the all-purpose pearls were that when we initially made them, we put them in the syrup and then we let it sit for 24 hours. And when we came back to them, we realized that they were a little bit harder than we initially saw, so they weren't super chewy and it was a little bit dense in the middle. So we think that could be due to the retrogradation of the starch over time, contributing to a more crystalline structure in the pearls instead of the chewy, starchy, gelatinized structure that we love. It happened a little bit in the all-purpose, but not as much as in the tapioca.
Thank you to the Flour Power team. I feel so much more confident. Now I know when I should substitute flours and when I shouldn't.
As you can see, the functional properties of flours are extremely versatile. The votes of our different flour recipes are in. Bread made with wheat flour was very different from bread made with rice flour, but both were good. Macarons made with wheat flour looked quite similar to the ones made with almond flour, but the texture and flavor of the wheat flour version was very off. Muffins made with wheat flour were different from the ones made with rice flour, but both muffins were good. Boba pearls made with wheat flour looked very similar to the ones made with tapioca starch, but the texture of the wheat flour version was very unpleasant. The Flour Power team hopes that you now have a better sense of when and where to substitute flours.
Don't be afraid of flour!
Was that you? Oh, no, that's you! 1, 2, 3. Don't be afraid of flour.
Okay, everyone say it
We're all
together. Okay. No, so you made it look like you're a lady.